people aren't the only person who have a say in, the products that we ship out. And I think that's an amazing thing because we get, tips from support or tips from sales folks who are day-to-day interacting with the customers, and they're kind of our eyes and ears to essentially what the customers have to say. And I think that is essentially kind of really core to how we build our products together, ideally.
Finally, this is happening. I don't know how many times we have gone back and forth with just talking so much of, product in general in real life and then over calls and stuff. And now finally, it's I'm glad that I'm able to host you. So welcome to the show. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live show, which, I sort of host a couple of friends of mine who are on leading products or building products or like product managers who are sort of, doing crazy stuff or doing building large stuff, right? And sort of bring them in, talk to them and, just record it. So that's basically the idea to it. And yeah, I'm glad that you are also here. So welcome to the show. And how's it going for you today?
Good. I'm super excited to be here. So.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so just to begin with, right, I think it would be amazing that if you could just give a little bit of background of yours and then a little bit of intro, and then we can probably quickly go into, everything about what you do, how things work at Carta and things like that. But a quick introduction would be amazing.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Erin. I actually started my product career a little bit unconventionally in investment banking. So deep in the trenches of Excel, beginning at Barclays, was covering the industrial sector. And I think during my time at Barclays, one thing was pretty clear, that I was a lot more interested in tech and trying to essentially optimize some of the older processes that a lot of investment banks typically try to use. So I think natural transition was into fintech. And of course, that is what led me to Carta. And I did about a year and a half on the strategic finance team at Carta. And I think one of the things that Carta has always been really good at is incorporating non-product people into just kind of building product. And that naturally kind of put me into a lot of hackathons and whatnot. And eventually led me to doing a full switch into product at Carta. So did that for a little bit, went over to venture capital and building accounting software for other finance professionals in the venture capital industry. And then more recently, I actually did another switch and now I'm building growth products for the alternative assets is what we're calling it. So for the more lesser traditional LLC type of structure, and trying to build out more of an ownership tracking software for them. So yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know about you coming from a finance background. I think that totally makes sense. Like Carta and then having a finance background, and then and that was also pretty interesting. That makes sense. Like if it's like you're hiring someone else from a different field, but then because they are the subject matter experts, sort of coming in to sort of build the product. That totally makes sense. And we have been talking about the topic of, since the day we have met. I think the topic has always been about how can we super obsessive about listening to our customers. And I think that's where, this whole idea popped up in that we should really talk about what does the culture in Carta looks like when it comes to, listening to their customers and sort of building it. I mean, in general, I think the idea is that Carta is pretty niched out sort of product. Like there's a certain kind of people that you guys are building for. And it would be pretty interesting to sort of, how you sort of go deep into those persona and then, building and catering to that segment of users. So, but before we go and deep dive into it, I would really love to know what does the product culture at Carta looks like? And if you have to just summarize that, what does it look like to build products at Carta? Like if you had to just quickly give a summary in terms of, as a product manager, what are those stuff that you love about the process of building products at Carta? And then, probably just, talk about how does it look like product building at Carta. Yeah.
Totally. I think one of the things that I really like about being at Carta and building products at Carta is the collaborative nature of it all, and kind of going back to even like my own background and how I was able to switch into product is partially because of that collaboration that happened. So product people aren't the only person who have a say in the products that we ship out, and I think that's a amazing thing because we get tips from support or tips from sales folks who are day to day interacting with the customers, and they're kind of our eyes and ears to essentially what the customers have to say. And I think that is essentially kind of really core to how we build out products together, ideally. Yeah, so that's kind of the general, I would say, summary of product culture. And
Right.
of course, we have like more traditional like product specs and what we call starts with why. So we always try to figure out why we're building something before getting to the what. And that's kind of, I think, at the baseline of every product that we build.
That's interesting. I think being more collaborative with different part of the company altogether, I think should be the priority in general as well.
Yeah.
And as you rightly said, like it's not just the PM who is sort of owning the whole vision, or let's say how things needs to go, because user would be someone else altogether. And then how do you sort of empathize every time when they come up with the problem or anything like that? I think that totally makes sense. But
Yeah.
who, like, just to sort of understand, like, who are these? So let's say the product obviously is becoming would be like the central piece, which is sort of synthesizing the data from all of these personas that you're talking about. Like, but who are these other departments, and what kind of signals does these folks really give it to you? Like, what does this sort of signals that comes in, and who are these people that you're talking about?
Yeah. So I think that depends on like the business unit that you're part of or the type of product that you're building. So back in venture capital team, when we were building accounting software, we actually partnered very closely with the fund accounting team, and that was a pretty sizable team of a couple hundred folks. And they were the ones essentially providing the service, interacting with our customers day to day, and of course using the software that we were developing together. So that would be essentially an example of another cross-functional team. And then of course there's the customer success managers who are more so interacting with customers from customer success and just kind of that angle. And then, of course, our implementation folks who are actually onboarding and owning the first stages of that customer process. So we really try to holistically partner so that everything from when they onboard all the way to, maybe they have a support case coming up is fully covered in the features that we essentially build out and the bugs that we might be triaging. So, yeah, I would say those are all the examples of people that we talk to.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I'm assuming these are more of sort of qualitative data that comes in, like qualitative feedback that comes in from all of these places.
Yeah.
And obviously it might get overwhelming at some point of time, because, by the way, just to understand, like, how big is sort of the Carta team, if you had to tell me?
Yeah.
Like, in general, the product team.
Oh, the product team. I think that in like the total, I think we're around 100. I could totally be making that
Okay.
up. But that's another thing that's unique at Carta. Like each product that we focus on, for instance, the fund accounting team, the venture capital team has their own product team and its own unique culture. And then the alternative assets team that I'm currently part of has its own product culture. So, for instance, alternative assets team that I'm currently on is much smaller, and we are just a small team of 3 IC product managers with a director. And then the venture capital team is a lot bigger just because it is a more fully fleshed out product.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
yeah.
No, that makes sense. And just to understand, like, as you said, right, like, because there are multiple product teams, and eventually everyone is sort of moving towards that one sort of goal as the product pillar altogether, or even the company in general. Just to understand, like, as you said, like, like most of these feedback is sort of internally coming in, or let's say because there are like different partners, they are like customers, sort of onboarding folks as well, who is giving you feedback and stuff. What does that method look like of synthesizing like so much of customer feedback data that is coming from different touch points. And I'm also guessing because it's B2B and because there would be certain kind of ways to prioritize that as well. It could be based on number of things. It could be based on what is in priority right now, what kind of customers that you're dealing with, and then there would be like different departments sort of asking you, okay, we need this, we need that, just to sort of understand, like, obviously it is going to be chaotic, but what does that method look like when it comes to, let's say, adopting or like getting all of this feedback in one place or something like that, for you as a product person? What does the method look like, and in general, how the team really process it?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I almost like see my role as being one of like a detective. And I think the best product managers aren't necessarily, coming, like, I think the best product managers are, to me, defined by how well they are at, finding the right problems and identifying the right trends. So let's say, even like an organic conversation, like by the kitchen, I hear, accountants complaining about something, or people who I sit next to, maybe the sales folks are complaining about how their demos didn't go well. And then I try to essentially ask the question why. And if I hear it enough times and I start to kind of see the trend, or I'm hearing the same thing over and over and maybe different flavors, that's kind of where I start to form my hypotheses and a thread that I can continue to pull on. And that's kind of where I would try to do more formal interviews with customers, maybe have them put me in touch with the customers that are complaining or customers that are, raving about us. And then that's kind of how I go about my research process.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. And then, as you said, like, let's say hearing is one of the ways to sort of, okay, be there with the team. You're sort of hanging
Yeah.
out with different part of the, like sort of company. And then you always sort of go and hang out with, let's say, other stakeholders who would be, much more closer to your customers.
Yeah.
And just to go into the nuance of the mindset on how do you sort of interpret this feedback? Like, let's say, always, again, one another thing is that happens is obviously you're getting a lot of signals, and again, there are multiple sources to how you're getting those signals, but there is this. I feel like there is this skill that every person has to eventually, build out, is to how to interpret, like sort of actionable insights out of it.
Yeah.
What does that method look like, and sort of mental model, if you can give us a little bit of, like, okay, this is how I do it, or this is how, I have seen my sort of colleagues do it in Carta, and what would that look like?
Yeah. I guess, yeah, one recent project that I worked on, and going back to the whole hypotheses, I think initially I start to hear, like I just mentioned, like different snippets of, let's say, maybe recorded sales calls or live feedback from sales folks and other folks, and then I typically kind of form 2 to 3 hypotheses for me to validate. And then that's kind of where the next phase is, can you put me in touch with X number of customers? Maybe it's 10 to 15. And then I think that's kind of where I start to either validate or discard some of the hypotheses. And that's kind of like where the research process really begins, where I'm able to have now, validate the things that I've heard and whether or not it's true or not, from the customers themselves. And that's kind of the next phase where, if it's actually validated and it's aligning with the things that we're hearing internally, then that potentially is a feature worth building. And it's not always available, but I think obviously the qualitative feedback is the best if it can actually be backed up by quantitative data.
Right.
So to the extent that we can make that connection, maybe with another precedent tool that like we shipped in a different part, or other types of data that like usage data, then I think that's of course helps us bolster our case. And in a lot of ways, like I say detective, but it's also like product managers in a way is very similar to being like a lawyer, where you're advocating on behalf of your customers, you're gathering evidence to essentially be able to work on the features or the projects that you're putting out. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I've done it, at least.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. And what do you think becomes like the biggest challenge with when you deal with like qualitative data in general, or let's say customer feedback in general, because sometimes I always hear, and like because I'm a building product around that, a lot of people say that like sources are there, but then interpreting something becomes like hard because customers sort of would be vague. They are trying to say something, but they're like they're just saying that this is wrong. But again, they're trying to say something which it's not like it's pretty clear that okay, this is what I want, right? So how do you go into interpreting that that piece is something that I would love to hear out, because what I've seen is that everyone has their own method. Like either they're just listening to some customers again and again and again and again, and then sort of build up that essence or empathy towards okay, this is what maybe this customer is trying to figure out. Then go and prototype and show something and be like, oh, is this something that you're looking for? If that confirmation is there, then it's fine. But in between, like that individual product manager or designers sort of need to imbibe that empathy. So just would love to understand on your end, like what does that method look like? I think this is very subjective, but would love to understand your understanding to that.
I think it requires and I think that's why qualitative research is so hard, because you can't ever take something, qualitative research, especially at a face value. In fact, you actually can't do that with even like hard quantitative data, right? I think you have to dig a little bit deeper into actually understanding what it is. So let's say they are like, hey, like I'm just making up an example. Like I really need this export button. Like I really need it so build it. And maybe the context is missing, and that's kind of where, and we hear it from multiple customers, that's kind of where we dig a little bit deeper, maybe sync up with them and actually meet with them and hear their stories of why they're actually needing that button. And the why could actually tell a completely different story and could lead to a completely different feature that's not an export button. Maybe it's just like a report that we email to them. So I think that's always been really helpful of a process, just getting the full context of where they're coming from and where they're really struggling with, so that our team could actually build maybe the button, but maybe completely something different that could help them even more. So I think it's just diagnosing what it is, and I always try to actually help them in every call, help them show us what they are actually doing today. So one of the first questions, and I think one of the best questions that gives me the most insight is, hey, can you just walk me through what you're doing today? Like, is it like, walk me through the process that you're like, how are you essentially today? Maybe it's in Excel, maybe it's a hacky, multi-step, they're going in Gmail, they're going in Google Drive and whatnot. And that actually shows me how they have tried to solve their own problems, because if they're like, I actually don't do anything, that tells me that that's not a super big pain point that they're trying to solve. Because I think if it is super painful, then they're doing whatever it needs to be done to actually mitigate it. So yeah, I think that's kind of sticking to the facts, sticking to what they're doing today is really helpful.
No, that makes sense. Like that totally makes sense in general. Like, just to ask them like, okay, why did you even reach to this point to ask an export button? I think that is like super important. With that said, like if you had to just take me through, two scenarios, let's say one is like, okay, I know that this is what we are building and I'm going and sort of trying to find out if this is something which is useful. So that is one scenario where you would go in a user interview with an agenda, right? That this is what we're building. What do you think about it? Whereas the other part is we're trying to explore. There's a lot of ambiguity. We haven't yet sort of reached to a point to say, this is the direction that I'm taking for this part of the product. And these are like two extremes scenarios. I mean, the first one is basically outcome of the first, the second kind of question that I'm trying to put in. So if you have to do like a user interview, what would that look like? How would you sort of structure it? I know like there would be like scenarios, different kind of scenarios and stuff, but let's go for the first one, which is the problem statement is still ambiguous and you're trying to figure out in a user interview that this is, or like, what would that look like? I mean, what would that direction of that user call would look like?
Yeah. I mean, even the two calls, I would still kind of approach it similarly in the sense that like the difference would actually be in the thing that I'm trying to validate. So it seems like in the first scenario, what we're trying to validate is like maybe different types of designs or the placement or the user experience. And that would kind of be at the central point. And it would be a lot more structured, I think, with a very standard set of questions, and I would try to lead calls pretty similarly. Of course, if it goes and uncovers a completely different insight, then it could go a different way. As opposed to, it seems like in the second scenario, it's a little bit more ambiguous, like you said,
Yeah.
and there's a lot more variability or room for variability that we need to leave for calls to essentially, uncover something that we totally didn't even think about. So I think that's how I would essentially try to tackle those two calls. I also think that it's really important to have the right people in the calls that we're attending. So in the first scenario, I definitely would like my design counterparts, but also engineering counterparts, because it seems a little bit more later stage in the actual build out, as opposed to maybe the first or the second scenario rather.
Yeah.
I would try to have the sales folks or other cross-functional partners, because it's so early in the stages in the product development cycle. So.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense for sure. And then one of the things, like when we made up, like for the first time, one of the things that we were jamming about was, and you told me a story that, like how in the early days of a product, you used to be on the sales calls as to also sort of just talk to the customer directly. And we were also, sort of dissecting if PMs for some time could become like sales folks and actually go and sell the product, what they're actually building, and then that becomes like a research aspect as well, where you're going as a salesperson, but then because you're a product person, you're also taking that whole sales call to be like a user research call as well. Can you put your light over there? Like, I think this is a very unconventional method of thinking about it, and I totally agree, because I am a product designer or a product person turned founder. And one of the major things that I do for my company is to go to sales calls and do basically sales, right? And eventually what happened is, for me, is that, okay, I'm doing like sales calls. I know, okay, this is what is selling, this is what is not. And then because I have the direct access to influence the product, it's just becomes so easy to take up all of this empathy and just move around to say like, okay, this is what customers are saying, and I don't have to go through, different stakeholders to understand what customers are saying. But we'd love to understand your case as well, because that was pretty exciting for me to see like, okay, a PM sort of going over sales calls and sort of using that data to, sort of influence the product. So maybe that, a little bit of story around that, and what do you sort of think about if that unconventional method has been used by any other PMs out there?
Yeah, I hope that every product manager is able to be on sales calls, because I think the true way to actually, especially if you're working on a 0 to 1 product, to validate whether or not there's actually a market for the product or even a feature that you're building, is to be able to sell it. And I think that's, what better way to validate than be able to go and validate yourself, of course, along with the help of the sales team. So I think that's kind of what led me and to actually join the calls, and of course work with the sales folks and just collaborate with them, so that whatever data point, of course the sales team is going on a lot more sales calls than I ever would be, but by being able to, join 1 out of the 10 calls that they're on, it helps me essentially get that firsthand perspective rather than more of a hearsay from them and from the customers themselves. So I think that, that's been very fun for me. It also helps me empathize not only with the customers, but also from the sales side as well.
For sure.
So we can kind of collaborate on maybe like, hey, this aspect of the product is actually, we think that from the R&D team is a selling point. Is that actually resonating with the customer? If so, why? If not, why not? And then that also actually has multiple impacts down to like marketing even. So we can kind of always continue to craft the sales pitch, craft the marketing and whatnot. So
yeah. I've been thinking about this all out, like from a long while, where I felt like this was sort of an epiphany moment for me, where I was like, hey, if someone has to really get into PMF, and you are also has that product, and you also have that product mindset, I think this will be a killer combination to just have a little bit of your sales skill, just go and sell like a product manager, and then eventually sort of be much more closer to the market of what people are saying, what people are not saying, and then it will be so much faster to just be there and do that and sort of impact the product as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
almost like a
yeah,
direct line
that,
of
that sounds
business.
good. No, for sure. I think that's a great process, for sure. And a couple of few more questions. So one of the things that I've also seen is that like quantifying a qualitative data has always been a pretty messy stuff because there are two problems that I've seen. One is how much can you really do like user calls? That is one thing. Because there's some extent to it where you would anyway find a pattern. So it's like 5 calls, like 10 calls or something like that. I don't know how would you think about it. Then the second piece is how do I still quantify this data saying, because I can just say like, okay, these are the piece of feedback that these different kind of customers have given to me in each of these calls.
Yeah.
How would you represent that whole text based data into actually saying like, okay, this is what people are actually talking about by to give to a stakeholder who is more driven towards say where are the numbers, right? Because
Yeah,
that becomes an easier way to sort of consume a data like that.
totally.
Have you ever been into a situation like this, and do you find like there's actually a problem, and there's something that is there a method to do to, let's say, how do you quantify qualitative data in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard, and it's definitely something that we run into all the time. I think one of the first questions, especially in a growth team, is like, why is this a market worth going after? Like, what data do we have to actually back that up? Because it's a pretty big proposition. So obviously, one of the first places that we go to is trying to back it up with just kind of market research data. We partner very closely with business
Interesting.
operations team. My prior team, in the venture capital team, employee productivity was something that we cared about from like a margin standpoint, and that's one of the, I think, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to measure. And what we did there was essentially incorporate like the tools that we were building and data that we were able to get from those, and we, in a way, we actually created our own quantitative data internally, to back up essentially, hey, like these are the amount of hours that are getting spent on emails and just kind of responding to customer emails alone. Leveraging the Jira analytics, like, or even like Slack, I think has some cool features where, let's say if you have a dedicated channel for where all your support tickets are coming through, you can actually like do a lot of keyword analysis on, maybe certain words or phrases that are coming up. And those are all methods that I've used in the past to back up some of the hypotheses and whatnot.
No, sounds good. Sounds good. I think that becomes like, okay, just sort of put it in one place and sort of figure out like, okay, how can I sort of eventually quantify with different tools at the end of the day? It could be like how you said, like how you using like sort of Jira to put in like data over there and then figure out like, okay, these are some of the themes that we are working on and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it, got it. So one final sort of advice would you give to, let's say, startup founders or early stage product teams on effectively sort of listening to their sort of customers and how they can leverage that data for more around product market fit, right? So what would that look like for you?
Yeah. I think the best advice that I can think of right now is don't get too attached to your like first product. I think because product managers and just kind of R&D teams, we're so
Yeah,
in the weeds and spend so many hours. Like it's almost like our
for
child.
sure.
I think it's really important, and I think that's kind of goes back to being closer to customers, actually jumping on calls so that you can actually not get too attached to the product, but get more attached to the customer. And I think certainly did not come up with that advice. I actually read it somewhere. Fall in love with your users, and when you do that, then you can actually then create the best product for that user, rather than falling in love with your product altogether. If that's essentially what your customer is telling you. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's a solid advice. I think that can go as important as it could be, and pretty straightforward to just say, listen to your customers and then build it. That's it. Like, that's how the loop basically really works.
Yeah.
With that said, here is I would say, small rapid fire round for you. It's gonna be like super fun. So be rapid, and let's see how you do over there. Okay? Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So let's start with the first one. Okay. So morning person or a night owl?
Unfortunately, a night owl. I want to be a morning person.
Okay, cool. One word to describe your management style.
I think curious. I go deep in the
Nice.
woods
Nice.
sometimes.
Got
Weeds,
it.
rather.
Favorite productivity tool?
I love the Apple
nice.
Notes app. I'm always like on
Yeah.
my phone, so for
You're
anything
almost
down.
asking everyone to go basic. Cool. The last app you downloaded out of curiosity because you said you were curious.
That's a great question. I think it was one of the new fashion apps that I wanted
Got
to
it.
check out. So yeah, it was called
Oh, nice.
Capsule.
Got it. Okay, iOS or Android? I think that is gonna be straightforward, right?
Yeah, iOS.
Most used emoji in your team chat.
The
All
rocket
right.
ship.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Okay, one feature you would add to your product right now if resources were unlimited.
yeah, I had this idea not too long ago, but it would be like a 23andMe type of diagram for how like our funds and like entities are all related to one another, just because Carta has like a
Nice,
huge network.
nice.
That would be
Interesting.
worth capturing.
All right, so favorite way to unwind after a stressful day?
Yoga.
Perfect. Book or podcast that you want to recommend to every new PM that starts their career or want to move towards product management?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think there's a single podcast, but any podcast that essentially, helps you get a little bit more smarter around your industry, I think would be the right one.
Got it.
How I built
Oh,
this.
nice. All right, so this is gonna be the last one. Best piece of advice you have ever received.
Don't take every advice you get.
Damn, it's like I'm telling you, it's like every time you just go to basics, right? Like don't overcomplicate anything. I mean, that's how it looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining this session, and it was so much fun to sort of hear out how you think, how you process stuff, and that's exactly what the whole sort of theme for this podcast is. And I'm like super happy to talk to you, and hope you have enjoyed this. And what do you think about the conversation that we had? Yeah.
No, it was super fun. I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining in, and thank you everyone who has come to this live. And I'll see you in the next live. Bye-bye.
Bye.